In a world where even the smallest disagreements can lead to arguments, violence, and even death, two brothers tackle the difficult subjects. This podcast is not just about dissecting topics from two different perspectives. It's also about how to have conversations on difficult topics while avoiding the urge to tear someone's head off and vomit down the bloody stump of their neck. Right, Colin, since it was your idea for this topic, do you wanna introduce it?
Yes, I would like that. I wanted to talk about recognizing it's like one of the buzzwords today is misinformation and disinformation and fake news and all this stuff. But I think it's really difficult for anyone to be able to recognize that stuff. And obviously I'm not an expert on it, although I feel like one sometimes. But there's just so much information out there. And the problem is, I was listening to, Diana put me onto a podcast, our sister Diana put me onto a podcast by Jason Bateman and Will Arnett and another guy that was on Will and Grace. I forget his name. You probably heard
that one too, huh?
What's that?
He put you onto that one as well.
Yeah. Which, and what's funny was I wanted to listen to, I was trying to think of who would be, and they've done a ton. I guess they just started in the pandemic, but they've been very prolific. And they're smart guys, it seems like, but I was listening to one, there was a few that sounded interesting to me, like Michael Lewis I wanted to listen to, and a few others. But Kamala Harris was on there, and I thought, I have not, there's all these clips floating around of her that are so unimpressive.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I wonder how true that is. Why not listen to the podcast and see if she does seem a lot more intelligent than they're making her out to be? Because you listen to long clips and you think, she cannot be bright. But I imagine that, if I were on the news all the time, it's like George W. Bush. He had the worst clips ever, when you'd listen to the things that he came up with, and fool me once bit that he did that one time. I mean, what a disaster. You're thinking, can this guy, could he graduate from the 5th grade today? I don't know. But then you wonder, man, if I was on the news all the time, like Kamala and George W. and everybody else, and getting, paparazzi, getting journalists, everybody, there'd probably be a ton of stupid things. I mean, I'm sure you could think of a billion stupid things that I said over the years as being my brother. So I thought I would listen to it. But I think as I listened to them, man, you could hear how quickly who they were, which was heavy left-leaning Democrats interviewing her, which is totally fine. But I think every time they look at it, and when she would say stuff, it didn't need to be substantiated what she said to them because they agreed with what she was saying.
Yeah.
And I'm not criticizing them. That's fine. It's a great podcast. They're hilarious guys. I really enjoyed it. But she's saying this stuff that I totally disagreed with. Not all of it, but she'd make a point that I thought, no, that doesn't make any sense. And they'd be saying, oh yes, yep, 100%, yeah, preach, and saying all this stuff. And you're thinking, okay, but that's how we all look at the reason why that resonated a bit with me was because that's how we all look at the media. When we listen to, and I'm not just talking about Stephen Colbert or the nighttime guys or Jon Stewart or whoever, or Rush Limbaugh when he was still around, the people that listen to him, like, yeah, sure, they're listening to them and they're kind of getting entertained by that. But when we hear any news story, and then before all that, what originally prompted this idea in my head was I sent you that graph which talked about the changes in income over time, and you dismissed it out of hand. I mean, immediately.
Yep.
And we're like, no, that's a terrible graph. I don't care about it. And I'm like, oh wow, that was not the response that I expected, for a number of reasons. And I guess, for a number of reasons. One was it seemed to coincide with some of the things that we had been talking about, in that it's sometimes in our society we're not realizing how things are improving in the world. We have this idea that things are bad, people in other countries are poor, And we don't realize that actually things are improving. That, you and I have talked about if you look at the 1800s, something like there's numbers out there that say 90% of the world lived in poverty and was kind of subsistence living. Fast forward to 1980 and things have gotten, then it was like 45%. Today it's like 10 or 15%. I mean, in the last 40 years, it's the fastest increase in income in recent years. Now, some people are upset. I'm not saying that we don't still have problems, that we still don't need to help those people, or that maybe, I'm not as worried about it, but there still is maybe an issue of inequality, that are some people increasing more than others, that type of thing. But I was anyway, we looked at that, and I was just really surprised by your take on it. And I thought to myself, how interesting it is that when we go out and look at different graphs, information on social media, on the news, and everything else, we have this paradigm, these lenses through which we're watching the world, and it colors so much. We have to make, at times, I wouldn't say a snap judgment, but to some degree, yes. We have to decide, well, am I going to dig into this one? How much time do I have to dig into things? How can we do that? So I wanted to talk about the best way to look at that information and decide, do we dig into that? Do we just dismiss it out of hand? Do we just accept it? What should we do about it? Maybe you could give me your thoughts on it, and also what you thought on that graph, and if you've changed it at all, if you still feel the same way.
Yeah, I do like the topic because one of my interests has been how the media will manipulate situations, how and not just the media as an organization, but individuals in the media, and those that have a solid platform in some of the social media companies, how they're able to manipulate what they're putting out there to the public. It's over the last couple of years, I've been reading some books on. I sent you the picture of the one, Tim Harford, the Data Detective, which talks a lot. Really good book and really easy to read, and talks about how data both can be manipulated and how we really need to be attentive to how the media is being presented and have a better understanding of data that's out there that's being given to us, because if we are not as easily fooled, then those that are presenting the information will have to do a better job of giving us everything that's out there. And so to talk specifically about that post, and I think I can share. Let's see if I can do this. I will also take a screenshot of this picture, so that for those that are listening to it, that will have a chance to see it, they go to the website. But it's basically a graph of daily median income over a span of time, and it shows the median income increasing. And Colin, when you'd sent me this, you're right, I did, and it wasn't really fair, but I did immediately react dismissively. And I think I think maybe part of the reason why I reacted that way was the context, because you're right, it's a very similar concept to what was covered in that book that we discussed in a previous episode, the book called Factfulness, by, I have it right here, by Hans
Rosling.
Hans Rosling, right there.
Hans.
And it is, and I think, and I had to stop and think about it after decided you wanted to talk about this subject. Why did I react so differently? Why was I so open to the idea in the book and so resistant to the idea in the tweet? And I think the answer is the context, the book versus the tweet. Because first of all, I'm not a big fan of Twitter. I don't understand why anyone would want to know what someone else has to say about in 280 characters. I don't feel like anything interesting can happen in that short a span of time. And I feel like this graph is a great example of that, because it's like taking a snapshot of a movie and expecting people to understand the movie. There's so much more information that goes into this particular graph, rather than just the daily median income. And if I go over here to the table, and it shows the countries, the time frame, and if I click on the if I rank the listings by daily median income from highest to lowest, in the year 2017, which is, I pushed it back a couple of years because I didn't want to include the shutdowns that happened, because that could really skew information. So I'm back to 2017. And so then it lists all these different countries and from highest to lowest. And then it shows the change in dollars from the date that the information was taken in the very beginning to the last date, and also the relative change with the percentage change in that particular country. And so we can see some pretty interesting information about it. And so I spent some time going back and forth between the chart, the table, which is more of the raw data. It's not completely raw, but it's closer to raw data. You could think of the chart as sort of a visual display of some of the information. And then they have a really nice feature on the map where it shows you color coordinated the different countries and their different daily median incomes. You can select a particular country and see what that country looks like at a particular frame of time. And all of that is interesting. Go back to the chart. And the reason why, when I looked at the chart and really started to figure out what it was that bothered me about it, it's that on Twitter, when the information is presented like this, the question is often asked, what does it mean? So we have this piece of information. Income has increased, tripled almost over the course of, 30 years. Across the world, the median income has tripled. So what does it mean? And I think that this is what's so important. In the book, he can really break it down and really explore and examine different facets. And although there may be someone's individual bias coming into that, you have more time to understand and get a grasp on it. Whereas in Twitter, we have this chart. And the person that posted this chart didn't really give anything else. He said some snarky, cute little comments about, it is what it is, or something like that, and then left it at that. So now we can jump to our own conclusions.
It wasn't snarky.
You're right. You're right. I'm sorry. It wasn't snarky. It was. Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, I have it pulled up. It says median income in the world roughly doubled between 2001 and 2017.
And then what does he say after that?
Before you ask, yes, it is. I only know what that means because I happen to follow this guy a bit, and everybody always, invariably in the comments, it says, does this account for inflation? Is this adjusted for inflation? And every time it's like, yes, it's adjusted for inflation.
And so one of the problems was that in order for me to find this website where this information is I had a difficult time finding it. I had to go and blow up the graph that he had posted, and then I had to go and look at the very bottom. It has a website. Now I had to go and kind of dig my way across to it. So it's not his fault. I'm not blaming him. I'm blaming the medium in which he chose to show this information. And that Twitter doesn't really give you a lot of space to address these sorts of things. And so it becomes, as you were saying earlier, it becomes very easy to stop the questioning if it supports your perspective, and just as easy, as you saw in those comments, for someone to dismiss it out of hand with 10 or 20 words. This isn't worth my time. Is it account for inflation? Oh, but look at how they. One of the comments was something about where the information was, how they collected the information was different in some countries, and so that's not very accurate. And so I guess I got really dismissive because it took place on Twitter, which is not a great place to be presenting in-depth, detailed information. And this is complicated, and really they need a space to be able to explore
it. Yeah, I guess that's surprising. I guess your first response was not that at all. It was just, it kind of attacked the way they had gathered the data, which we later talked about, and it seems like they probably did a decent job. I mean, you're not going to get, but anyway, I guess we don't need to get into that, because then you kind of changed tacks and said, well, it's because it's on Twitter and you don't have, you can't explain anything, just what you were just saying. But to me, I mean, who cares? So people are going to do that, I guess. And it's interesting too. You said, well, it was so hard to get that data, which, I hearken back to the previous discussion that we had about media. Mm-hmm. And I guess this is a continuance of that in some sense. But when we were having that discussion, I believe it was on the podcast itself, but we were talking about Rand Paul. And you had asked me before that discussion on the media, well, what did I think about Rand Paul and the current issues that what would you call it? The problems he was having because he had asked for assistance for the people of Kentucky. I think he's from Kentucky. The people of Kentucky, because they had some tornadoes or a hurricane or something, and he had asked for the federal government to give them aid. And then everybody was calling him out and saying, like, hey, why are you doing this when you in the past have always ridiculed FEMA and the federal government for giving aid to all these different states when they had natural disasters? And you were like, well, Colin, how come he says that? And I said, it was interesting, Brian, how difficult it was to figure out why he had said that. Because every news article, not every news article, the first few news articles that I looked at said nothing about his response. And ultimately I got to his response, which was, he said, well, listen, I'm okay with giving aid to these different states as long as we don't exceed the budget. In those cases, I was criticizing the fact that we were exceeding the budget and that people still wanted to give them more money. And I said, fine, as long as we reduce another budget, like, money we're sending in foreign aid or the money we're spending in the military or whatever. He said, we need to keep if we're going to exceed the budget for natural disasters, we need to take that money from someplace else, which is perfectly reasonable. And at that time, I said to you, Brian, isn't it crazy that that the first few news articles that we looked at had nothing about that, and the headlines had nothing about it? You said, well, I only had to look at 2 articles. And I had, and you were explaining the fact that in the first article, it didn't explain his point of view. And in the second article, the headline had nothing about his point of view. It just it painted him in the worst possible light. And then you had to read down a number of paragraphs before you got to the information. That seemed to be okay with you. Like, no, I think the information's there if you're willing to look for it. Then on this graph, he's got the source right at the bottom of the graph, but that's too hard to find it. I mean, that's the first issue I'd have, but why don't you answer that one?
Well, I mean, the way that the graph is laid out, and let's pull it up again. Here we go. It was not particularly easy to find, and that doesn't take you to the page of the graph, and it's not. Again, I'm not blaming this guy, the tweeter. I'm not blaming the website. It lists the website. The basic website. It doesn't go directly drill down to that particular page. Even once I got to the website, it took me a little while to find this graph that I'm showing you right now. So and then if you look at the font, it's very small, especially when it's on your phone, and it's also not. It's like a middle gray. And I'm not saying that anyone did that in a way to try and hide the information, because clearly it's not the most important thing on this graph. But when you're looking on your phone, when you're trying to look for something that either confirms your bias or contradicts your bias, you're not going to go and go into it. But Twitter is not really, as I said before, Twitter is not really designed, and it's not used in a way for these type of thorough investigations. It really requires someone to have an interest to go beyond what you're seeing in your Twitter feed. And most, let's be honest, most people don't. And if you wanted to do all that, you wouldn't be on Twitter looking for information. You'd be on websites, blogs is a great example where people have the time. I know you like to send me the one economist that has these long blog posts, and it's a great opportunity to really dig deep. He does a great job of linking to his sources and to other pieces of information that are related to what he's saying. And that's where it can occur.
Shout out to John Cochran, the grumpy economist, by the way. Excellent.
John Cochran, the grumpy economist. Yeah. He's thorough, which I appreciate. And I want to, well, I mean, did you want to respond to any of that before I change the topic slightly?
Yeah, I guess, it's just like, to me, I think Twitter can be useful in the sense that if you find people that you trust, I mean, it's almost as if, you'd say in the past, well, there's certain newspapers that I look at because I trust the reporting that they do. This guy, Jeremy Horpedal, I don't know how to pronounce his name exactly. He's an economist, and I've liked a lot of his posts because they make sense, and you don't delve into every one because you don't have enough time in the day. But when you begin to trust people, that becomes a news source for you where you can, not to say that I'm telling everybody, oh, I found out that, like, if I'm going to share this, with everybody, I might dig in a little bit more. But I know, it was the chart was from a good place. B, he posts good charts, and they're well thought out. So to some degree, there's a bit of trust built up there where I don't have to dig into everything that he says. And I think that should be part of how we look at the media. And I don't think you can necessarily, like, if you're looking through Twitter, there can be good things there that make sense. Like, that coincided with a lot of things that I was reading that I have been looking at in the past, and that I had really delved into, and I trusted him. So yeah, it was a trusted source for me. So I think that's part of how we should look at it. But yeah, we can move on if you want.
Yeah, no, you are right, and let me just illustrate a little bit. There is that for you it was sufficient because you've already essentially verified him as a useful source, whereas I hadn't had that opportunity, and so I was. It doesn't make sense for me to say, well, Colin, can you go and, show me that this is an individual that I should actually be listening to but so I think part of it was that your valuing of him as a source got lost in the message that was passed on to me. So, I mean, but I see what you're saying. That makes sense. And I guess that sort of relates to where I wanted to go with this, which was, as you know, my wife, Chris, owns a yoga studio. And so she has lots of communications with mostly teachers, some of the people that come in to use the studio as students, other studios and other teachers that are coming in and around. And one of her big frustrations is the way in which people communicate with her. One of the things that she'll often tell people is, don't send me messages through social media like Facebook or Instagram. I use that just to market. And so I'm not going to get that message right away. And people send her messages through Facebook and Instagram. When she says to them, I need to have this information in an email because it's got dates and times, I need to be able to go back and reference it to make sure all the information is correctly. And they call her and tell her it verbally, or they send her a text, and you have one of these texts that's, that's 700 characters and that's broken down into 4 different. And so she's going to go through back and forth. And so it was really when we, she's in her frustration has, explained, and I agree that there are certain media that are better suited for certain content. Just as in our communications, some content is better to be had face to face, when you can see my expression, you can see my frustration, you can see my sarcasm, whatever it is that we're seeing. A lot of those things don't translate well in the written word. And sometimes you want the details spelled out very specifically in writing so that it can be referenced later on. And just as in the personal communications, when we're presenting media to a group of people, to our audience, whether it's through media, through social media, to a number of people, I think we also need to be very attentive to the medium in which we're passing that information.
Yeah, that's probably true. But and frankly, with social media, there is a great danger. The like button, and
yeah.
And the algorithms that they have. Frankly, I'm pretty excited. I hope that when Elon takes over Twitter, that the algorithm becomes very transparent. And that is, because everybody's now worried, well, he's going to, skew it. They're saying, they're probably, some of the people that are worried are probably thinking, like, it's fair right now. Don't skew it away from fair. And the other people, and those people are primarily on the left.
Sure.
And the people on the right are saying, like, it's unfair right now, so make it fair. I hope whatever happens, that it's just wide open, because then we can all look at it, or at least more transparent, more apparent what's happening. I mean, oftentimes as I look at these types of things, one time you and I were talking about newspapers, and you were telling me, well, the Washington Post and the New York Times, I get my news from them because they're centrist. They're unbiased. And I said, I don't believe that. If that were true, then you wouldn't have just one side of the political aisle accusing them of being left-leaning, of leaning the other direction, And when I look at, if that makes any sense, so if you had a particular newspaper and some people were saying, hey, they're left-leaning, and other people were saying they're right-leaning, then you'd be like, well, maybe they're kind of middle of the road. But if you look at Fox News, everybody knows they're right-leaning. If you look at CNN, everybody knows they're left-leaning. If you look at Twitter, the people that are accusing them of shutting down one side are almost completely accusing them of shutting down people on the right. That tells me it's probably left-leaning. So, but whatever you want to think about what's happening now, I just hope that whatever else happens, that we can just get a clear picture of what they're actually doing, as opposed to it's some black box and we can't really tell what's happening. Because I think that's the greater danger. I don't mind so much, the snippets that you get, because frankly, that was an interesting chart. And then when you did delve into it, if you had found some interest in it, as I did, and decided, when you finally did delve into it, there was good information there. It was helpful to kind of show, like if somebody would look at that uncritically and say, oh, I didn't realize things had gotten so much better. Let me delve in and just make sure that that's true, or see where the data is coming from. Like if that were the way somebody were looking at it, that would have been a great way to kind of capture somebody's interest and point them to where the information is, which I think is fine. So I just hope that, I think that's more what we should be looking at, is ensuring that the person giving us the information, not as much the medium, we should take that into account, but that the person or the news source or the journalist or whoever it is, that we kind of get a picture of who they are and can we trust them or not. There's certain people in the news that I think you would say, Tucker, I can just guess who it is, Tucker Carlson, Dr. Laura Schlesinger or whatever, all those people, like you're saying, I'm not going to listen to them. And I'm sure there are people on the left too that you say, they're a little bit alarmist or crazy or over the top. You have certain people that you trust, and that's the key, is saying, okay, if I can start finding people that I don't have enough time in the day. I've got a job, I've got family, I've got my personal interests. I can't suss out every news story or every thing on Twitter, so I'm going to try to get some trusted sources that I may not agree with all the time, but at least they're trusted, if that makes any sense.
For sure. And, I agree with you about the algorithm, because one of the things I think is very frustrating is the only time we get insight into how the social media companies are working things is when there's a whistleblower. Right? It's sort of interesting. Now, they are private companies. They don't have an obligation to share this information with the world, but it is interesting that we need
a legal obligation. They may have an obligation, but they don't have a legal obligation to share it with the world.
Right. Yeah. You could say that a social obligation or a moral obligation, ethical, whatever. Yeah. And I do get a little bit concerned with the Elon Musk situation, where people say, if we know that he's doing a good job when he's upsetting both the left and the right. That some people are right now, only the right is upset, therefore it must be left-leaning. And I would agree that there is probably some leaning left, but I've been reading an article in a magazine about some of Facebook's problems with the Congress or the government with some of the political content and how they've been trying to navigate things, especially during the Trump years. And one of the things that was coming out was that every time they found, when they would change the algorithm to try and limit violent speech or lies or disinformation, and they were finding that it was affecting more right-wing content providers, that they would say, wait a second, we must be doing it wrong, let's shift it in the other direction. And that may have been true, but no one ever asked the question, maybe there's more misinformation, or maybe there's more, the further right you go, the more loud the people are yelling, and the more crazy they're getting with their ideas. Because they were also finding in some of these statistics that the right-wing content was getting more reaction, more likes, more shares, more comments. And so you say then, well, why? Because there's more right-wing activity, does that mean that Facebook is skewing right? No, That's more, has to do more with the people that are involved in the content creation and reacting to the content. So you can't always say we know we're in the middle when we're upsetting both sides, because sometimes some sides, one side or other, is more vocal and is more extreme. And also, I also want to add one little thing, kind of unrelated, which is that I have found a news source that is slightly right-leaning, which I've been really enjoying, called The Dispatch. They do an email newsletter, and I've been finding them very effective. And I don't always agree with them, but I do feel like that when they talk about the content, they are fairly balanced, and it is good work there. I also want to say that I'm getting now a timer on our communication here. We got 5 minutes left. Apparently now they're going to cut us off at 40 minutes. So we need to be cognizant of the time.
We've already gone for 35 minutes? That's crazy.
Yeah, we have.
Wow, we're so interesting.
We think so.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I don't know. One of my keys, one of the lenses through which I see the media and the world is this. Because one of the things, I disagree with what you were just saying about that, because I often hear people on the right accusing people on the left does this, the left does that, or whatever, and the people on the left doing the same thing to the right. They're the same. What I mean is, I don't think anybody's more extreme than anybody else as a whole. Obviously, individuals are very, very different. But when the people on the right are accusing the left of the politicians are dishonest, they're just trying to ruin things or whatever, there's just as many, it may shift slightly, in any given month or year or something like that, but there's just as much disinformation on the left as there is on the right. There's just as much extremism on the right as there is on the left. So when we try to say, well, I mean, maybe it's just because they're louder or more extreme, I just disagree with that. Everybody's the same. Like when people start to look at the other side and say, well, they're stupid, or they're not as well informed, or they're whatever, I just find that really, really hard to believe. And because everybody's the same. And we just happen to hold different beliefs, and we're looking at things through a different paradigm. It's as simple as people on the right are saying, listen, it's not that we trust corporations or the free market in the sense that they're better people. It's just that they have less control. The biggest corporation is the government. You know what I mean? I don't know. That's my thought. Is I always, when I hear the politicians on the right accusing those on the left, or vice versa, the media or individuals, they're just so similar. I just find it hard to believe that they're very different.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think it's something worth digging more into. And for the sake of time on this particular one, I think we had talked about maybe extending this topic into a 2 episode conversation. I think that would be a good thing to do, because we're now at 3 minutes left here, and I don't want to put out my piece and then get cut off so that you can't have a chance to respond to it. It would be interesting, maybe before we get together next time, or I'm going to put it on myself, to do a little bit of research to see if this whole equally loud, equally violent, equally aggressive on both sides. See if there's something that that will either support or contradict that. We'd also talked about maybe looking at the media and how politicians use it as well, possibly for the next time. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover on the next round?
I don't think so. Those seem like good topics.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, I'm glad your life has settled down and we can have these conversations again. I was drying out a little bit. It's sometimes I don't want to say I get angry, but sometimes I get a little my heart rate rises a little bit with these, but I always do enjoy them. So I'm glad you're back.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's good to be back. There's a lot to do, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to have some free time. But yeah, it is good to discuss these things and to kind of suss it. Like it helps me to put things. I don't know how to think through. It helps me to think through these issues and think up actual arguments, as opposed to at times you can just wonder why people are so stupid that they don't agree with you. But when you have to actually put together the argument and make the point, it helps you to kind of organize your thoughts and think about why somebody might be hold a differing viewpoint,
For sure. Yeah. When we talk about when I'm thinking about it, one of the things I do consider is what might Colin say to what I'm going to say here, so that I can be maybe a little more prepared, not so much with a counter argument, but looking at, where do I imagine you'll go with it, so then I can do some research on that topic to either, bolster my own opinion, or maybe modify it slightly, that I can react to that a little bit better. So I do agree. It is useful. Thanks, Colin.
All right, Brian. We'll see you.
Bye. We hope you learned something in this episode of Brother versus Brother, a podcast about difficult conversations. We also hope that you enjoyed it enough to subscribe to the podcast. You can help us by spreading the word. Share this episode on your favorite social media so that others will have an opportunity to experience it as well. You can also support us by donating through Patreon. This information and more can be found on our website, broconvo.com, and on our various social media accounts. Thank you.